Hey everyone, thanks so much for that introduction, Lynette. I'm Dani Wallace from the University of Melbourne, and today I'll be talking to you about the effect of chytrid fungus infection on amphibian breeding displays. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Gunakane and the Tungrong people on the land where this research was carried out. So, this is the beautiful Victorian Alps. It may not look like it, but this really winter wonderland is home to very special species. They're critically endangered Alpine Tree Frog. So unfortunately, the Alpine Tree Frog's declined in over 80% of its historic distribution, and an all too familiar story, the Alpine Tree Frog has declined due to chytrid fungus. So chytrid fungus is so good at killing Alpine Tree Frogs that almost all mature frogs die after their first breeding season. So it's almost a complete population turnover from each year to year. So hang on a second. If all the mature frogs are dying, how the heck is this species still going? So the Alpine Tree Frogs have figured out a really masterful way of surviving with chytrid fungus, but their methods are very unexpected. So Alpine Tree Frogs are surviving with chytrid by breeding more. So these guys are completely reliant on reproduction to ensure that their species is surviving from one year to the next. It's amazing. Supervisor Laura Branley, her early stuff found that Alpine Tree Frogs are responding really strongly to chytrid fungus. So females that were infected had larger ovaries and oviducts, which corresponded to more eggs being produced. And in males, infected males had a higher sperm count than healthy males. So both of these things would correspond to more baby Alpine Tree Frogs being produced by infected animals. So that brings me to my research for tonight. So we've seen that Alpine Tree Frog's biology and reproduction is affected by chytrid fungus, but we don't know a whole lot about what happens in terms of their breeding display. So I'll be looking at how chytrid fungus affects breeding coloration and calling, but for tonight I'll just focus on the breeding coloration side of things. There was meant to be a call of the Alpine Tree Frog. It was like, weep, 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 but you can imagine it anyway. The aim of this part of my PhD is assessing whether chytrid fungus affects breeding coloration in Alpine Tree Frogs. So it may not look like it, but the most kind of colourful part, almost, of an Alpine Tree Frog, in the males at least, is their little throat areas. So these can be quite colour variable. So this guy's got little dark areas, this guy's got a really yellow throat, and we think that this is potentially a sexual signal. So when a male calls, his throat kind of blows up like a balloon. So I think this colour is like a flashing signal to a male, to a mate, to say, oh, look, I'm really sexy and colourful. So how do we actually measure these really tiny throat areas on these really tiny frogs? And I'll tell you, it's very difficult. But we used a magical machine called a spectrophotometer, which takes readings of brightness and chroma of the frog. So this analyses the light absorbance and the reflectance of a surface. So pretty much it's like a magic wand that shoots out light, touch that to the frog's surface, and it gives you a lovely, beautiful spectrogram of the colour that that painted frog is. So we took these colour readings in the field, and then we swabbed the frogs for chytrid. So now I'm making this look really easy, but it's really hard to get the frogs to sit still enough to do their little backs and the little throats. So I think I just need a PhD in just holding Alpine Tree Frogs steady to get these damn readings correct. So what did we find? And the results were pretty damning. So infection prevalence significantly increased over time. So on this graph, we've got infected animals at the top and uninfected animals at the bottom. So we had 5 kind of survey periods. So at the start of the survey, only about 13% of the animals were infected, whereas at the last survey period, over 80% of the animals were infected. But it's only a month difference between the first and the last survey period. So infection moves really quickly in Alpine Tree Frogs. We also found that coloration was impacted by chytrid fungus. So UV chroma was significantly impacted by infection status and load. So infected frogs had almost 20% more UV chroma. So that pretty much means infected animals were more colourful, which is kind of the opposite of what you'd expect. We also found that UV chroma increased with infection load. So heavily infected animals had more UV chroma. So the more infected you were, the more UV chroma you had. So the more infected you were, the more colourful you were, which is kind of, again, counterintuitive to what you'd expect. So why is this actually important? So these are the first results to show that chytrid fungus affects male coloration in any species. So that's really exciting because we know a lot about how chytrid fungus kills frogs. We know it's really good at it, but we don't know a whole lot about what happens in between the infection state and when they're dying. We know even less about what happens in terms of reproduction when a frog's infected. So we found that infected animals had 20% were more colourful than healthy males, which is wild. And males that had more UV chroma were also more heavily infected. However, this may not necessarily be a bad thing for Alpine tree frogs. Because males with increased UV chroma may be more attractive to females. Because they're more colourful, they may be sexier to females. So infection could actually mean making Alpine tree frog males sexier. But unfortunately, this is kind of just the starting point of this research, so the list of things we don't know far outweighs the list of things we actually do know. So we've got no idea what is driving this change in UV chroma. So it's either the frog or the chytrid fungus making these changes, and we don't know which is which. So if it's the frog somehow knows it's got chytrid fungus, and it's like, yep, I need to breed and become sexier before I die, and I'm going to do it by changing colour. The opposite to that is it's the chytrid fungus going all Frankenstein on the frog, being like, you'll be more colourful for some unknown reason. I don't know why that would benefit a fungal parasite, but hey, it's a weird response. The other thing we don't know, this is my dad's favourite question, we don't actually know whether Alpine tree frogs can see UV, and we don't know what role this is playing in mate choice. However, it's pretty likely, as pretty much all nocturnal animals can see UV, we just don't know the extent to which this is playing a role in mate choice. So, as you can tell, I've got a lot of work to do, but lots of cool, exciting stuff initially. So, literally today, I finished an experiment, started treating them with Alpine tree frogs in the lab. So to kind of back up our results in the field, we simulated this experiment in the lab to kind of control some more conditions like the temperature and things like that. And it went well, all the froggies are doing good. So I also aimed to kind of repeat this experiment in a different species, so the Stony Creek frog. So these guys show a really dramatic colour change. So the males go from really boring brown to really beautiful yellow. So I've collected some data from these guys from the field. So I need to analyse that data, and then hopefully I'm going to bring these guys into the lab as well and kind of simulate this experiment. And lastly, I'm hoping to collect data from whistling tree frogs, or Litoria, verreauxii, depending where you stand on the taxonomic argument. I won't go into that, don't ask me about it. So these whistling tree frogs are the sister species of Alpine tree frogs, so we want to repeat these methods and these guys and see what the results are like, if they're comparing or they're contrasting, or if the results of these kind of experiment are the same, which would be super interesting. So this is kind of one of my favourite expressions. If chytrid fungus is making Alpine tree frogs sexier, does anyone care? I don't know. Well, I think we should, because this is the first evidence of chytrid fungus causing a colour change in not just Alpine tree frogs, but any frog in general, which is really cool. So I've said kind of we know a lot about chytrid fungus. It's really good at killing frogs, but we don't know a whole lot about what happens reproductively when they're infected. So we found that males are more attractive when they're infected with chytrid fungus. So this is good in a way. They're kind of living with chytrid fungus instead of just all dying right off the bat. But it could also be really bad news if infected males are becoming sexier. So if they breed more, not necessarily the best genes are being passed on if these heavily infected males are being chosen by females to breed. So there may not be a lot of hope for Alpine tree frogs adapting to chytrid fungus in the future, which kind of makes me a bit sad. I've also seen that Alpine tree frogs are completely reliant on reproduction to survive with chytrid fungus. If just one season fails, that's the it for that population. So we really need to protect Alpine tree frog breeding habitat to ensure that these guys can live into the future and at least have a chance to survive with chytrid fungus. So this is where my little tree frog call was going to come in. Anyway, I can do it with my mouth. But the next time you go up to the Alps, if you hear the beautiful love song of the Alpine tree frog, the weep, 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 you'll just know that they're doing their bit to help save their species, and hopefully we'll be able to see them surviving a long time into the future.
I don't touch you.
A huge thanks.
The end.
That's all right. You got the gist. A huge thanks to my supervisor Laura Branley, Lee Berger, Lee Skerritt, and my co-author Steve Zane. And thanks heaps. Sorry for the stuff at the start.